You're on.
We have finally gotten to the generations of Shem. We've taken a look at Ham. We've taken a look at Japheth.
Okay,
And
here.
we've taken a look at some things dealing with Noah. But there's a big old long genealogy with Shem. And some people, they look at genealogies and say, well, they're boring. Let's go into the Bible and find something important. But we're going to see in this particular genealogy that there's a lot of very important things that help us to look into what's going to actually happen in future books of Torah and in what's coming even within the prophets. But as everything in Torah, there's also a lesson, a life application lesson that we can take out of this particular verse, because we're only going to look at one verse. And then we'll look at one verse at a time, one step in the genealogy at a time. But before we do, let's talk to our Elohim so that we can do this and hopefully be able to be a little more perceptive to what we're getting. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to study your word. We ask that you'll open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts so that we can see, hear, and understand what your word is telling us and what your spirit is saying to us. We thank you for it in the name of Yahshua. Okay. So we're going to take a look starting at Bereshit 11:10. That simply says, these are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begot Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. So we say, okay, well, here we go with the genealogy, and we're going to have 200 begots, and we're going to be asleep by the time we get to the third person. So we have to look at this from a different point of view, because although this is simply the beginning of a genealogy of Shem, it's also a prophetic statement, and it also contains a lesson for us to keep in mind. So the first part of this verse simply says, these are the generations of Shem. So we take a look at the word for generations, which is toledot. And aside from meaning generations, this word means results. So we could actually read, these are the results of Shem.
No.
Okay? Which starts to change the picture. The name Shem means name, but it comes from a primitive root sum that means to transform as well as to set in place. So if we take these two ideas and put them together, we can formulate something here that it's going to show us the results of a transformation that will set something into place. We're going to see the results of a transformation that are going to set something into place. Now, we take a look at the number 100. And then the word is me'at. But when we look at a number in Torah, we automatically start to say, okay, well, does this relate to one of the numbers? What can I learn from it? And the numerical value of Kof is 100. And we'll take a look at that in just a minute. But first, let's consider me'at as a word. If we take a look at this, we see that it's composed of a mem, an aleph, and a tav. And we take a look at this and we say, okay, mem represents the word. Aleph, we say, is a representation of Yahweh Elohim. We say the first time we see the aleph as the root of a word in Torah is in Bereshit 1:1, where it says, Bereshit bara Elohim. So Elohim is the first time we see the aleph as the root of a word. It has the same gematria. It's 2 yods and a vav, makes up 26. Just the same gematria as the name of Yahweh. So the aleph is Yahweh that we're looking at here. And then the tav, we said, either represents the vehicle of sacrifice, but it also represents a covenant marker. So when we take a look at this, we can say that something in this verse is going to pertain to the covenant by the word of Yahweh Elohim that will set in place or bring about a transformation. Now we can take a look at the Kof. Now Kof represents two things. It can represent to be set apart to, or it could be to be divided or separated from. So if we take this component and add it to our idea as a whole, then we can say that the covenant by the word of Yahweh Elohim in his name, Shem, will be set in place and or bring about a transformation, setting something apart to him or causing a separation from him. Okay? Now we have a kind of a mouthful of a statement there. So we have to move on and take a look at the next phrase in this to see if we can come up with something else. And it says, Vayoled et aparkshad, and begot aparkshad. Now, in English, we don't pay a whole lot of attention to the et. In the middle, the word there in the middle is et. It's a grammatical pointer. It's showing that the object that it's pointing to is going to receive the action. In other words, the parkshad is the one who's going to beget. But the et, if we take that into consideration, we might consider this verse as saying, and prove the aleph and the tav begot a parkshad. Now, if we take a look there, then it's starting to give us maybe a little bit more clarity as to what's going to happen. So we're going to consider this for a second. The word begot is vayoled, comes from the root yalad, that means to bring forth. But now we have the name aparkshad. Okay, aparkshad has a strange meaning. It means I shall fail as the breast, or it means that he cursed the breast. So we could say, okay, well, let me see, it refers to breastfeeding, and it refers to not getting nutrition that we should be getting from the word. We could go that route, but there's a whole lot more to a parkshad than simply an idea of not getting the nutrition we need from the word. This name is the root of another word. And the root of the word is kesdim, that we're going to hear about in Torah soon. This word means Chaldeans. In order for us to get a little bit more insight from this, we have to take the Chaldeans into consideration. And we go to an extra biblical book to get some information. We have the book of Yasher. This mentioned in both Joshua and in 2 Samuel. Yasher means a complete history. So the book of Yasher tells us that Terah and his son Abram fled Nimrod, who wanted to execute Abram, and went to Ur of the Chaldeans, a city founded by Arpachshad. Actually, it was the descendants of Arpachshad that founded it, but we give the credit to Arpachshad. So it was from Ur that Yahweh called Abraham to leave the land of the Chaldeans and go to Canaan. It was in Canaan that Abram received the promise and the covenant of Yahweh to become Abraham. And it was in this transformation that the promises and the commandments of Yahweh Elohim would be set into place, as well as our choice to obey or not would also be set into place. In this alone, we consider now the Aleph and the Tav. We didn't talk about it earlier, but the Aleph and the Tav represents the word of Yahweh Elohim, that is his Torah, and that we find instruction in the Torah, and it is here that we find our choice to obey it or to reject it. Okay? Abram had a choice. He could have stayed in the land of Chaldeans, or he could do what Elohim said and move on into Canaan, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Okay. Several hundred years later, the Chaldeans would be known as the Babylonians, and also not from the Babylonians, but we link to the Babylonians also that the Assyrians would be there before they were there. The Babylonians would conquer them, and then the Persians would come and conquer the Babylonians. So We have the Babylonians who would take the rebellious children of Israel captive and back into the land of the Chaldeans. So keeping this in mind, let's consider the balance of the verse that says, Shenatayim achar chamabul, 2 years after the flood. The word Shenatayim is kind of an interesting word. It says it depicts 2 years, but its root is Shana, that simply means a year. This word, however, also holds another root in Shani, which means 2. So the root Shana also means a lifetime, and the root of Shani is a similar root of Shana that also means to repeat, to change, to alter. So the word achar means after, but comes from a similar root, meaning to delay, to keep back, and to hold back. The word chamobil means flood, but comes from a root yabal that means to lead, to bring, to carry, but it also means to lead away, to take away, or to carry away. So how can we apply this to what we considered concerning Abram and the children of Israel? This is where we start to take account the details of these histories, and this is where books like Yashar and the Book of Jubilees are helpful. Yeah, they're not canonized, but they tell us a little bit more about the history of what was going on. And if Yashar was mentioned in the book of Joshua as being an ancient document, then it had to have been there during the time of Moses as well. So
something like that contained something like that contained a Talmudic collection, or
you can actually you can go online and get the book of Yashar on PDF nowadays in English.
Just curious where it
But
was contained in something else.
We look at the book of Yashar. It says, Terah brought Abraham to Ur of the Chaldeans out of fear. What had happened was Nimrod had commanded Terah to put Abram to death. He wanted him to kill Abram because Abram was teaching about Yahweh Elohim. Nimrod didn't want to have a deity competing with him because Nimrod considered himself to be a god. Everyone around him considered him to be a god. So he ordered Terah, who was part of the court of Nimrod, to execute Abram. Terah refused. And as a result, Nimrod had his son Haran, which is the father of Lot, and Abram both thrown into a fiery furnace. The thing is, Abram stood by Yahweh. Haran stood by his idols. Haran was consumed by the fire and killed. Abram escaped from the fiery furnace. Okay? It was at this point that Terah grabbed Abram and they made a run for Ur of the Chaldeans. So they left out of fear and they went into the land of the Chaldeans. Yahweh Elohim led Abram out of Ur, and Abram followed out of obedience. The children of Israel went to Egypt out of fear. They were starving. They sent the brothers to get grain, but there was no food. They found out Joseph was the head honcho. Joseph said, "Come on." So they left Canaan out of disobedience because Elohim had told Jacob not to leave Canaan. As a result, they became slaves in Egypt and were led out of Egypt by Moses, who obeyed Elohim's command to take him out of Egypt and back to Canaan. Okay, well, this verse doesn't say anything about Egypt. It's just mentioning Pakshad, Kashim, the Chaldeans. But if we look at Amos 8:8, it has a word there in the word Kior that comes from a root Yeor that means Nile or river, and Yeor is one of the roots of a parshad. So within a parshad, we also find the Nile. we find Egypt. So this is telling us not only about the Babylonians that would destroy the first temple, but it's also telling us about this situation that we're going to have in Egypt. So this is prophetically linked to this verse as well. The children of Israel, out of fear, refused to enter into Canaan, and because of disobedience were led back into the wilderness until after 40 years. What did we see in the beginning of this? There was a transformation that's going to take place as well. Abraham has been obedient. He has set the covenant in motion with Elohim. Moses leads them out of Egypt. They receive the Torah, which is the covenant of Elohim. They reach the Jordan. They rebel. Out of disobedience, they're told to go back into the desert for 40 years. At the beginning of our study, we talked about transformation. 40 is a number that represents transformation, transition. So the Torah was given to give instructions to set something in place, and then something happened to cause a transformation. So we see that this is a prophetically, kind of a prophetic little passage that's telling us about events that are going to occur. Now, when we consider that they had to go back into the desert until the old generation died off, so that under Joshua, the new generation would be led into Canaan. Now, Elohim told them, when you go into Canaan, kill everything that lives. Don't let anybody live. Kill their cattle. The only thing that you don't kill is the fruit trees. All the other trees, cut them down and use them to build with. What did they do? Well, they went to the first place and they did okay, but immediately there was disobedience because Elohim said, everything belongs to me. But Achan decided that he wanted a wedge of gold and some clothes, so he kept that, lied about it, and as a result, when they attacked Ai, they had a problem. They were defeated until this came about. So disobedience immediately upon entering the promised land. And out of fear of not telling the truth and being discovered, there was a bigger disaster. So, but immediately we see the Gibeonites that tricked Joshua into signing a covenant, an agreement. And they started to make covenants and agreements with the people that were in Canaan as opposed to killing them off like they were supposed to. And what happens in Joshua going into Judges is that they get themselves into a mess because of idolatry. Judges have to come pull them out. They make teshuvah, they get into a mess again, they have to get pulled out, back and forth, until they finally say, we need a king to lead us. Well, they get their king. First king goes back and forth. Second king makes mistakes. Third king gets involved with all kinds of paganism, leads them down the wrong road. After Solomon dies, what happens? The Assyrians come and they take them captive. Then the Babylonians come, the Chaldeans come, they take them captive because of disobedience. Then the Persians come, and under Cyrus, a pagan king, he says, you can go back to Jerusalem, rebuild the city, rebuild the temple. Okay? It was a pagan king that actually released them to go back. So this verse shows us events that would occur in future generations, but it also teaches us about valuable lesson. We can be seduced by fear and yield to it, but it isn't until we trust in Yahweh to be Elohim that we can be led back to his covenant blessings. There's a difference between healthy fear and a fear that becomes Elohim. Our fears can become Elohim to us. We can yield totally and completely to our fear, and this type of fear always leads to bondage. In considering our definitions, we can see that our lifetime can be changed or altered based on what we follow or what we don't follow. Do we regard fear as a tool